Welcome back. Street vendors are a crucial part of New York's shopping districts. However, they're often ignored when it comes to major life-changing policies set for small business owners. Joining me to discuss the fight to protect these vendors is Jennifer Salgado, lead organizer for the Street Vendor Project. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Kibin. Thank you for having me.
Now, can you tell me a little bit about your organization, the Street Vendor Project?
Sure. So we're a member-based organization of over 2,500 vendors across New York City and work alongside them to advocate for vendor rights.
Now, street vendors have made the news recently because they called on Governor Kathy Hochul to decriminalize and legalize street vending. Can you tell me more about this effort?
Sure. Late last year, we launched a campaign to legalize and decriminalize the street vending industry. At the moment, there is an existing cap for both food vendors and merchandise vendors. Last year, the Street Vendor Project secured a historic win by passing Intro 1116, which it raised the number of permits for food vendors, but unfortunately, that left merchandise vendors out of this legislation. So we knew that there needed to be more, and we kept hearing from vendors that there needed to be more. So we launched this campaign to remove the cap completely for general merchandise vendors and food vendors, and so that it can be legalized and introduced to the industry once and for all.
Now, I really want to highlight the importance of these definitions and these terms. Why is it important that we understand the difference between decriminalizing and legalizing? What does it mean to actually have both?
Right. The legalizing component means that there would be an increase of permits and licenses for vendors. So that's the legalizing component. And then the decriminalization component comes into play because with this piece of legislation at the state level, we're asking for NYPD to be removed from street vending oversight. As you know, when NYPD gets involved, in any case, it can always lead to arrest or become violent. And we've seen that in past years. We've seen how NYPD has thrown out vendors' merchandise or food, and we know that this can be avoided if it's a civil agency doing the oversight.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much for sharing that and kind of clarifying that. Now, following this, street vendors attended a 24-hour sleep out in front of Governor Kathy Hochul's office. Why did vendors actually choose this method of action?
Vendors have been in a way persecuted for years, and this is during the pandemic. We saw this persecution even more because not only were they continue to receive high fines that can range of up to $1,000. We saw that agencies were still criminalizing them for not having proper licenses and permits, and so they're tired. Honestly, that's really what it comes to. It's that they're tired of waiting around for the government to do its job, and so they wanted to make sure that their message was loud and clear to leadership.
Now, I understand street vendors also risk being excluded from the $1 billion set of relief set for small businesses. What does this relief consist of?
Right now, from my understanding, it consists of providing relief for a lot of restaurants, micro businesses, but it excludes the street vendors, which are actually New York State's smallest businesses. And the reason for being excluded from this relief is simply for not having the proper license and permits to prove that they own a business.
Now, this treatment isn't new for many vendors. You actually kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. A few months ago, we did see a video of NYC Sanitation Department destroying a vendor's produce stand. That surfaced all over the internet, and a lot of people had opinions on that. What would you say justice looks like for these vendors?
I would say formalizing the industry. The reason why this vendor's merchandise was thrown out was because one, the vendor didn't have proper license or permits, and there just wasn't a system in place for her to adequately get these permits and licenses. And so it's actually policy that DCNY and other city agencies throw out any merchandise that's not like within the legal range if the business is not legal itself. So this is completely all part of policy, completely legal. But justice for these vendors would mean a license and a permit, the right to be able to have access to that.
Now, this is actually getting a lot of support from elected officials. New York State Senator Jessica Ramos and Assembly Member Jessica Gonzalez Rojas proposed legislation in support of vendors. Can you actually tell me a little bit more about that?
Sure. So the two pieces of legislation at the state level that we are currently working on are S 1175 in the Senate and A 5081 in the Assembly. And these two pieces of legislation are exactly the same, just in different chambers. One, it would remove the current cap on general merchandise vendors and food vendors. It would remove NYPD from the oversight of street vending once and for all and permanently. And three, it would expunge the records of any vendors with past like misdemeanors.
Now, I know you touched on it a little bit, but many supporters also want Hochul to allocate funding to NYC so they can lift the caps on vending licenses and permits. What are some barriers that are making it difficult for vendors to get these licenses and permits?
There's just no legal way to obtain a permanent license. That's really what it comes down to. And right now, the city hasn't made a push to increase it since Intro 1116 was passed last year. And there's no clear solution yet proposed by the government to include general merchandise in this. Um, and so we really think that with these two pieces of legislation at the state level, we would be able to fully legalize the street vending industry moving forward.
Oh, okay. Thank you for sharing that. I had no idea that that actually wasn't even possible at this moment. So thank you for sharing that and clarifying that for me. I want to say that so many New Yorkers actually rely on and probably don't even know, but they truly do support street vendors on their daily commutes to work while they're shopping in the city. I know here in the Bronx we have so many. What can people watching do to support these vendors in their time of need?
Of course. So right now we are still pushing leadership, namely Governor Kathy Hochul, the Assembly, Carl Heastie, and in the Senate, Andrew Stewart Cousins, to fund and pass S 1175 and A 5081. And the way that an everyday New Yorker can support this cause is by calling your state legislator. Tell them why it's important to legalize the street vending industry. If you have a favorite vendor, talk about them and why they're necessary to and integral in your community. I think a lot of the times legislators forget that these people are the same people who live in their districts, same people who provide the liveliness in the community as well.
Now, speaking of support, I understand you also support this cause as a way to pay homage to your family. Can you just tell me about your family experience as street vendors?
Sure, sure. So my mom came here over 20 years ago, and one of the first things that she did as part of work was be a street vendor. She sold flowers on Fordham Road, right where their old Sears was. And so this is a really important cause to me because when I believe it was now 10 years ago on Valentine's Day, she was selling flowers on Grand Concourse in Fordham, and she was arrested. Um, there was no need for her to get arrested. Um, it was simply because she didn't have the proper license to vend in the street and permit. So she got arrested. And I know that this is something that we continue to see day by day. And I think that it's just it's time that the government do right by these people because, like I said, they're an integral part of the community. Um, had my mom not been arrested, she would have continued vending and hopefully use the funds that she raised from street vending to open up her own restaurant because that's what she wants and that's what a lot of street vendors want. They want to be able to have to be a street vendor, a proper street vendor with license and permit to eventually like grow in as an entrepreneur.
Thank you so much for actually sharing that story, because I think that we don't really, it's become so normal for like many people, for me especially, like to see people selling flowers, fruits. When it's summertime, we get ices, and you don't really think about like, oh my gosh, this person could be arrested just for, kind of like bringing some life into the community. So I appreciate you for sharing that. Quickly, we have about a minute left. Can you just share any resources Street Vendor Project has, in an effort to help vendors who actually may need it?
Sure. So we do have a series of services that we offer for members. We offer legal support. So, for example, if a vendor were to have a ticket or a fine, we do have a legal director who can assist with that. This is open to members. And we also provide small business consultations. So if a vendor, let's say, wants to grow their business, but they don't know how to, we do have people on staff who can provide that support, opening up their social media accounts, setting up PayPal, Zelle, all that good stuff.
All right. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining me. If you take a look at their screen, you could actually see their social media so you can actually stay up to date with them. Once again, thank you so much for joining me, and we'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday.